I'm going to end this section with looking at Louise Hay, who is one of the most influential and well-known of New Age healers. The photograph here of her is being interviewed by Oprah Winfrey, who also has been a major force in the New Age movement, among other things. So one powerhouse talking to another. And you may know, but Oprah has Super Soul Sundays. Spirituality is a very important part of her work, and she talks about it very openly. And it's interesting to see because the New Age movement has been criticized by me, among other people, for being apolitical. But in fact, if you look at it, Oprah certainly has not been apolitical. She put her vast fortune behind Barack Obama when he was running to be president of the United States. She's been involved in producing film and theater, and so this idea that because somebody's spiritual they're not active in the world it can be the case, but it doesn't have to be the case. And certainly when we look at people like Oprah Winfrey or Louise Hay, who became a publishing mogul, she started a New Age publishing house. And in fact, one of the writers that I talked about earlier in the course, Asha Frost, her book You Are the Medicine was published through Hay House Publishing. So I want to look at her. She's one of the founding figures really of this movement. So I want to look at her in some detail. Louise Hay has been referred to as the Queen of the New Age, which recognizes how pivotal she has been in the development of this type of spirituality. Also, look again at the date. She lived to be very old, so she's a living proof, if you want to look at it that way, of her teachings. And many aspects of Louise Hay shouldn't be surprising at this point. So her first bestseller, You Can Heal Your Life, starts with her biography. And so we've seen this again and again in the course, that often it will start with biography. When we look at Mary Baker Eddy, she talks about her, wrestling with illness and so on. And so Louise Hay talks about her childhood, which according to her was about as miserable as it could be. She suffered under physical and sexual abuse from her stepfather. She was born in poverty. She left home very early and became pregnant very young. So very challenging life. And then, according to the biography, she eventually married a fairly wealthy man, and for a period of time her life was stabilized. And then in her 40s, she was divorced and became interested in different approaches to healing, health and healing, including New Thought. So when she's in New York, she's studying under these New Thought teachers. But it's very clear from her book, it's very eclectic, her approach. So she's open to reading and learning anything. And then at this time in her 40s, she is given a cancer diagnosis. And again, I have no way of corroborating this. We do know that cancer can go into remission for reasons no one can explain, but I have no way of knowing how accurate all this is. It's a testimonial. And so she talks about how she says to the doctors, give me 6 months to try to heal it on my own. And if that doesn't work, I'll have the surgeries that you're suggesting. And so we can see the genesis of her ideas very early on, that she links where the cancer is and the disease to her life and her experiences and her thought patterns. And so she says it's no surprise that it happens. It's ovarian cancer, and having been a victim of sexual abuse, she links it to that. And she undergoes a series of healing practices, including reflexology, colonics, meditation. She's doing it all. So again, that idea that you can combine from all different traditions. And according to her biography, she is able to heal herself without having to go to biomedicine. And then this in turn, very shamanic, puts her on the path to a different kind of life, and she becomes a teacher and a healer herself. And Louise Hay started to put these pamphlets together with sort of the basics of her ideas and with her affirmations, and they began to sell out. And then eventually she got a book contract and published You Can Heal Your Life in 1984. Louise Hay was also very popular. She eventually moved back to California, where she was from, and she began working with members of the gay community during the AIDS crisis. And so the gay community in California were some of the first people to support her work. And so she publishes the book, You Can Heal Your Life. And in many ways, I wouldn't say she single-handedly created the genre, but this was one of the key books that opens the floodgates. And if you go into any bookstore, if you go into the North Bay Mall or wherever you live, you go into the mall and there's a bookstore, you will find a huge section of self-help and healing. And it's, you know, this form of publishing is one of the biggest forms there is now. At the time she was publishing, it would have been a very small part of the market. So self-help, self-healing becomes a whole field of thought and endeavor. And this is going on at the same time as the practices are coming into the mainstream that we've talked about, such as Reiki and therapeutic touch and so on. So this is the book that started it all. I'm showing you the original cover. It's the one that I saw when I bought it. And the title really says it all. You can heal your life. So the idea that you can take healing into your own hands, that you don't have to be dependent on others. That's very much part of the self-help genre, this very individualized approach, which has its upside and its downside. But I think really, and I can speak to, as somebody who's read a lot of her work, and I admire her a lot actually, that it's optimistic. There's a great optimism and hope in her work that she passes on. And that may be the biggest gift that she's giving to people when you think about it. Because if you don't have hope and optimism, it's very hard to move forward in any aspect of your life. So this idea that you can take it into your own hands, that you can be efficacious in your own life and move forward with optimism and hope, I think this is central to Louise Hay's message overall. This quotation is taken from the first page of the book, and I've included a short section of her writing in your course pack. It's the final reading for the course, and she puts her philosophy in a nutshell here. What we think about ourselves becomes the truth for us. I believe that everyone, myself included, is responsible for everything in our lives, the best and the worst. Every thought we think is creating our future. The thoughts we think and the words we speak create our experiences. So I think in looking at this, you can see very clearly the connections with Christian Science and New Thought, that idea that the mind and our thoughts are where you have to start. And it's also, we find this in Buddhism also, the idea of the mind and how our thoughts are creating reality. This is a very idealistic notion, as we saw with Christian Science. This is where it gets into some hot water, the idea that we're responsible for everything in our life, the best and the worst. This, you know, you can see that her critics are going to say something like, if I'm in Gaza and a bomb falls on my house, am I responsible for that? So you know, we have to sort of sieve this through our own view of reality, but I just want to engage with it. I think it has something important to say, nonetheless. So every thought we think is creating our future. The thoughts we think and the words we speak create our experiences. So again, we've seen this in other religious traditions, the idea that our thoughts are important and our words are important. How we speak to ourselves and how we speak to others is important. And she goes on to say, which of these statements sounds like you? People are out to get me, or everyone is always helpful. And I think this is of great value in looking at how our typical ways of looking at the world and approaching the world does impact our reality. I'm for one, I'm not saying that it creates all of it, but there is no doubt that if I go through life thinking people are out to get me, we all know people like this, or we may be people like this, we're going to be looking for that. We're going to see that all the time, whether it's actually there or not. And if it gets to a clinical level, it's called paranoia. Everyone is always helpful. That's a very different orientation. I could also argue that this could be a very naive person. So I'm somewhere in the middle on this, as you may have gathered. But without a doubt, our stance in life, many psychological schools would say this, our stance, our basic stance in life profoundly affects our experiences. And you probably have friends and family members who fall within these positions, and you can see very clearly that their lives usually play out quite differently based on their basic attitude to the world. Is it a hostile world, or is it not? So obviously this is very extreme, and there's Louise Hay and other New Agers have come under a lot of criticism for being naive, for being apolitical, and so on. But I want to engage with the positive part of this, that she's very much putting the power back to the individual, and saying you can change the way you think, and therefore, at least to some extent, can change your reality. And in her case, she thinks you can profoundly change your reality. On page 9, she writes, I find that when we really love and accept and approve of ourselves exactly as we are, then everything in life works. It is as if little miracles are everywhere. Our health improves, we attract more money, our relationships become more fulfilling, and we begin to express ourselves in creatively fulfilling ways. Now, again, we see that extreme idealism of this position, but she's saying something important here, and which many schools of psychology and religion and spiritual traditions would say, which is how we move through the world is going to impact both on our own psychology and our own health, and on others. And so as that attitude improves, often other things will improve. So if we let's think of it in the simplest way. If I have an optimistic sense that things will work out, I'm much more motivated to keep trying, to get up, get at it. And we know that if you lose that, if you fall into a state of not believing that, nothing happens, because you're not taking action for yourself. So humans are have very delicate mechanisms a lot of the time, and they need, I would say Louise Hay is sort of offering this encouragement, right, to look at it this way. And I really appreciate that she's looking at a full flourishing life. All aspects of life are flourishing, and you get to be creative and to fulfill yourself. So it's a very, very optimistic, hopeful way of looking at human life, and for everyone. And I just want to add here, it's a very democratic way of looking at life. So she herself comes from a very challenging background, and so she's saying, with all of these things in place, she was able to live her life the way she wanted, creatively speaking, and in good health. And she lives to an old age, as we saw earlier. So I think, I mean, in some ways, this is very American in a good way, in the sense of that this is available to everybody. It's not just for a certain elite group of people, that all human beings should have the ability to fully fulfill their talents, for instance. I suspect it isn't hard for you to see why Oprah Winfrey would have found this very compelling, coming from very challenging circumstances as she did, and becoming as successful as she did on her own terms. So when you work through even just the short example I have in your course package, you can see a lot of this is psychology, and it's ideas that many psychologists would have no problem with. So I'll just give you one example that's always chilling. When we grow up, we have a tendency to recreate the emotional environment of our early home life. Okay. This is not good or bad. So she's very clear about this, that the universal power is not judging anybody. She's very, this is very typical of the New Age, to really downplay the idea of judgment. This is not good or bad, right or wrong. It is just what we know inside as home. We also tend to recreate in our personal relationships the relationships we had with our mothers or with our fathers, or what they had between them. And Freud would not argue with this. Think how often you have had a lover or a boss who was just like your mother or father. We also treat ourselves the way our parents treated us. We scold and punish ourselves in the same way. We can almost hear the words when you listen. We also love and encourage ourselves in the same way, if we are loved and encouraged as children. You never do anything right. It's all your fault. How often have you said this to yourself? You are wonderful. I love you. How often do you tell yourself this? So this idea, and I feel like Louise Hay was one of the first to really bring this idea into the mainstream, even though certain schools of psychology have been working with this for a long time. The idea that we have internalized tapes from our past, and often if you listen to what you're telling yourself, you can track it back to a person even, and it's in their tone of voice. And so she's saying we can access this, we can change this. And it's worth thinking about. It's worth thinking about. And I always say to students, pay attention to how you're talking to yourself in your head, because it's often very punitive. It's often very negative. And she's absolutely right. This isn't doing any good to talk to yourself or other people in that way. So, so I want to talk about at the end of the book, and when I teach this in person and I bring the book in, people come up to me at the end and they want to look through it. And again, this is controversial because I've said this again and again. It can be interpreted as blaming the victim, but I just want to look at it with an open mind. I think there's some truth in it, regardless. It might not be 100% of the cause, but so she looks at different body parts and then connects illnesses associated with these body parts with certain attitudes. So we'll just look at 2 examples. She goes through a variety: arthritis, diabetes, all different conditions. The throat represents our ability to speak up for ourselves and to ask for what we want. The energy center in the throat is the 5th chakra. It is the place in the body where change takes place. When we are resisting change or are trying to change, we often have a lot of activity in our throats. Okay, so you can see she's bringing in that idea of energy, the energetic body, and the chakra system emerging out of Hinduism. And so within that system, the idea of that chakra uniting the upper and the lower together. So as she said, from that point of view, there's a lot of energy in this part of the body and in the subtle body. And so typically, according to her, if you're having problems with anything in this region, including the thyroid or laryngitis, tonsillitis, this is all indicative of issues around expression. So the stomach digests all the new ideas and experiences we have. What or who can't you stomach? What gets you in the gut? When there are stomach problems, it usually means we don't know how to assimilate the new experience. So this is interesting because certainly within folk healing, this is absolutely sort of folk knowledge, isn't it? That idea that digesting experience, digesting food is very similar. And also, we're learning more and more about how the gut impacts human health. And so we often use these kind of expressions in English, and I'm sure in other languages as well, the way that show that we recognize the physical system is linked to our experiences. And so that idea of what can't you stomach, and we all have, I'm sure most of us have had that experience of if you're nervous, your stomach gets upset. So it can manifest in that way. What gets you in the gut? Also this idea of gut instinct, right? That these instincts that are in the body that help us and protect us. And I went to see a talk by Gabor Mate, very well-known speaker and writer on addiction. And he asked the crowd when I was there, when has your gut instinct ever been wrong? And everybody in the crowd said, never. So that idea that the body is responding honestly to situations even when your head isn't. And so again, as I said, this is controversial, but I'm just bringing it forward for you to think about it and engage with it. And certainly this book has sold, it's a bestseller. So people clearly are responding to this idea that there is a connection between body and mind, body and spirit. I'm going to end with an affirmation, and this is very much at the center of Louise Hay's work when she was working with clients and in her writing, this idea of using affirmations. And we have seen this already in New Thought, but it's very central in Louise Hay's work, and she often told clients to recite them to her every morning and every evening, to speak to themselves in the mirror, and so on. And so this idea that they create reality through our consciousness. And so let's just work through this. In the infinity of life where I am, all is perfect, whole, and complete. I believe in a power far greater than I am that flows through me every moment of the day. So again, this is very similar to Christian Science here, that everything is already perfect, whole, and complete. So it's about recognizing that, but also a belief in a power greater than the self. And she's not calling it anything in particular, but she's saying this would be true for all human beings, that they're subject to this power that's greater. So this spiritual power. and it's available to everybody all the time. I open myself to the wisdom within, knowing that there is only one intelligence in the universe. Out of this one intelligence comes all the answers, all the solutions, all the healings, all the new creations. So this is very clearly putting it in a spiritual context, one intelligence. And it's interesting to see the spiritual aspect described in this way. It's very New Thought as intelligence rather than God or the divine. And so she's saying this again, common across religious tradition, is that this force is what's responsible for everything. So that's why you have to get into relationship with it. It provides all the answers. And also the idea of going within through contemplation, through meditation, and so on, that you gain access and connection to this intelligence. I trust this power and intelligence, knowing that whatever I need to know is revealed to me, and that whatever I need comes to me in the right time, space, and sequence. All is well in my world. Now, I find just reading this calming. So you can see the power of words. I mean, I'm an English major. I believe in the power of words, and the way that these beautiful words can impact even on your nervous system when they're said aloud or inside. So all is well in my world. So you can see within this affirmation this extreme positivity and optimism that she is presenting. And again, as I said at the beginning, I think this is absolutely key to her popularity, the idea that she's putting power into the hands of the person, that they don't have to be victimized by their situation. As I've said over and over again, there's a negative side to this. You can see how there could be criticism of this, but I think that this kind of work has been so popular for people, regardless of what they're struggling with. They may be struggling with health problems or with money problems, whatever is going on in their life, that this has a profound impact to say all is well in my world.